There is a great photo on the internet somewhere, which I'm sure people will know of, and it says kind of like social life, study, relationship, career, good health, good night's sleep, pick 3.
Hi ladies, and welcome to an exciting new video series where we'll be chatting to a variety of experts to give us all their tips and tricks on how you can level up in your lives. To introduce myself, my name is Tia Angelos and I'm the founder of Smart Women's Society. If you're new around here or don't know anything about us, we're here to help you get smarter in all aspects of your life, including your money, career, well-being, and love life. We focus on giving really actionable and easy to understand tips that you can start implementing today. We're really lucky to be joined today by Elly Smith from Kind Mind Co. Elly's a registered psychologist who works predominantly with young women to help them navigate life's challenges compassionately and effectively. As you've probably seen from the title of this video, we're going to be chatting about all things workplace burnout today. And before we jump straight into it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel below because we have a lot of exciting videos coming soon, and hit the thumbs up button to like this video. Let's get straight into it. Elly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we jump into it, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Elly Smith. I'm a registered psychologist and I own a psych clinic in Brisbane, Australia called Kind Mind Co. And we work with a number of different people from all different walks of life, but I specialize mainly in women across the lifespan.
Amazing. So today we're going to be chatting about all things burnout, and burnout is definitely one of our most popular topics that we get a lot of emails and messages about, especially after the crazy last year that we've all had. So to start off, why is it so important for us to be able to recognize burnout, especially when it's happening to ourselves?
Absolutely. Great question. Firstly, because we're all susceptible to it. So it doesn't matter what industry, what job, what sector you're in, you can burn out eventually. So it's not just isolated to corporate office workers or healthcare workers, it can be anyone. Secondly, the negative impacts of burnout can leak into various areas of our life. So not just work-based, but also home life and social life as well. And lastly, of course, as we all know with stress, the more we are exposed to it, the more it can lead to negative health impacts, physically and mentally as well. So that's things like cardiovascular disease over time and stress-based illness, even being more vulnerable to colds and flus, which is not great at the moment.
Not at all. Let's take a step back a little bit. What actually is burnout?
Burnout is typically thought of as a state of complete exhaustion. So often this results as we haven't dealt with workplace stress over time, so it's quite prolonged. And when we think about burnout, there's typically 3 core components that come to this. So one is this idea of emotional exhaustion, so feeling really depleted and a lack of energy over time for quite a sustained period of time. So the second component would be kind of that cynicism, so that persistent negativity around work, going to work, and a lack of engagement in our job as well. And lastly, of course, is this idea of professional inefficacy, or I guess what we would call lower self-belief in the workplace. So that's the beast that is burnout.
It's definitely a big topic. What makes burnout different from just being tired or just from general fatigue?
Absolutely. And I think the easiest way to answer that is the severity of it. So burnout, as opposed to fatigue, is much more long-lasting and prolonged. So when we think about fatigue, that's normally stressor-based or quite short-lived in contrast to burnout. Burnout is really characterized, as I said, by this deep underlying sense of emotional exhaustion. And that exhaustion can start even before we're exposed to the workplace or stress at work. So it could be feeling run down, feeling exhausted, and a massive lack of engagement before we've even stepped foot in work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So one of the biggest steps with burnout is actually being able to recognize the signs of it. Elly, can you walk us through some of the warning signs of burnout?
Of course, and there are so many, so it is very subjective. But the big 3 that we are looking out for are those ones that we spoke about in the definition. So that idea of exhaustion, and this can be really physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, and I guess emotional exhaustion too. So that can look like a lack of engagement in our work and a general lack of motivation as well. The next one would be this pervasive idea of negativity. So not being engaged in our work, not really wanting to show up sometimes, not engaging with clients or colleagues like we used to, and surrounding ourselves, I guess, with this feeling of a lack of participation in decision making around our jobs and our careers. And lastly is this idea of self-belief. And this is a really important one, I think, when we look at the definition of burnout. And that's looking at the individual, but also the workplace. So the lack of resources, maybe unclear expectations in the workforce, and I guess inadequate time pressure or expectation on the job.
So how does burnout affect our work and our day-to-day lives in general?
In a number of ways. So when we do think about burnout isn't actually a diagnosable mental illness per se. So burnout is more of a vulnerability and a prolonged amount of unmanageable stress that we are facing. However, it can affect us in terms of our mental health. So I often do see with clients that they may come in for anxiety or signs of depression associated with burnout and high levels of stress in the workforce. So it's not necessarily a diagnosable condition in itself, more of a vulnerability to these stress-related conditions. So in terms of some of those effects, we're talking about a number of them. So we can be talking about, this pervasive lack of enthusiasm around work, around our careers, making mistakes or being not engaged. But I suppose if we look beyond the individual level as well, it impacts an organisation. So it is an organisational issue as well. So we're talking about things like high turnover rates in jobs, so people coming and going quite easily, but also on that individual level as well, absenteeism, so taking more sick days, or even that idea of presenteeism, which is similar to absenteeism. However, we're at work, we're just not really engaged in our work. So physically we're there, mentally not so much.
So Elly, what are some of the strategies that you have to help prevent or manage burnout?
The first one that pops to mind, particularly with COVID and working from home, is setting clear boundaries around when we do start work and when we finish work. So I do a lot of work with clients around, I guess, building this idea of a psychological commute. So something that signifies to us, today we're starting work. So at 9 a.m, at 8:30 a.m, whenever we log on or whatever that looks like, actually having a routine around that. So it might be something like going to the gym in the morning and then coming home, getting ready, having a shower and sitting at our desk. And the same goes for, I guess, the end of the day as well. So encouraging us to actively create a mindful ritual that signifies that we're going to leave work at work and actually start to relax. So that's probably the first strategy that pops to mind. I also think when we do look at burnout, I guess, as a concept and preventing it too, there is that individual level. So the things that we can do, looking at our job demands, our resources, our social connectedness, the control we have. But it is also an organisational issue as well, as we've mentioned. So sometimes that does mean we do have to get our companies, our managers, our leaders involved in changing the culture of burnout at work too.
A lot of us do work in jobs where there is a lot of stress. We do have a lot of deadlines. How do we limit those job-related stresses, especially after hours?
It is very contextual too. So it would look differently for a teacher versus, a first responder or a healthcare worker. These stresses look really different, but there are some big strategies that we can do to manage the job-related stresses we're exposed to. The first one that I always say is review how much we're actually using our emails. So looking at how much we're checking our emails, if they're on our phone, if we're scrolling in bed, and actually creating a boundary around time that we will check those emails and time that we won't.
So how can we actually build these strategies into our daily habits and routines?
There's a number of ways we can. And I always say start with that self-care routine. So making sure we're getting enough sleep is key. I am a bit of a sucker, so I always say 8-9 hours if we can.
The more the better.
The more the better. But making sure we get adequate sleep as well as that exercise. So we talk about exercise a lot in mental health. But neurochemically, we do know that we are releasing happy endorphins when we do that. So exercise is great as well. On the more workforce appropriate side, so they are all great, diet, exercise, sleep is great for managing our own mental health. However, when we are looking at the organizational side of things as well, I think the best place to start is having that conversation with your manager. So if we are noticing some of these job demands are challenging us to a point where it's stressful and depleting our energy, having that conversation and actually raising it with the company, with our manager, and saying, how can we collaboratively work together to remedy this, is also a great start. So really clearly communicating that with managers where possible. Those clear expectations and boundaries are key. And often boundaries, I think, are quite challenging to set, particularly if we haven't done it in the past. So I always find that using our emotions as a bit of a compass around, has a boundary been crossed for me, both personally but also in the workforce as well, can be quite helpful too.
How do you feel confident about enforcing your boundaries? Because I know that we do talk a lot about boundaries and why they're so important to be set, but a lot of people can set the boundaries, but they're actually too scared to enforce them.
Absolutely. It's a really hard thing to do. And I say that as a psychologist, it is a really challenging thing to do. So I always say start small, recognize those small wins, but start small in the sense of what we're implementing. So if a boundary feels like a massive thing for you, try to break it down a little bit and just do one part of that bigger goal or one part of that boundary. So for example, that could be something like, after hours, I won't check my emails, which I know we discussed before. So communicating that in a really respectful manner with a boss or a manager or even a colleague. But also personally, things like maybe learning how to say no, which is a really difficult thing to do, but learning how to say no and prioritize our time and our well-being when we need to.
So if we asked our community, Elly, if they had any questions or if they had any personal situations that they wanted your tips on, and we received so many responses, we were really overwhelmed, and unfortunately we can't go through all of them today, but I've got a couple here in front of me that I want to ask you now. Should we just jump straight into it?
Jump on in.
Awesome. So first question is, I am 23 years old and I've just started my first full-time role after graduating from university.
Congratulations!
I'm eager to impress and find myself working late every day and taking on every extra project or task. I'm feeling incredibly exhausted, but I feel stuck because of this pressure to succeed. Do you have any tips?
Firstly, congratulations on the job. That is so very exciting. I think also when we start a new job, that can be a really stressful period too. So making sure you are looking after yourself, as we kind of discussed some of those strategies, whether it's an app like Smiling Mind, a mindfulness app, diet or sleep, that's really helpful on the individual level. I guess when we're talking about this element of exhaustion too, I'd also encourage you to have a look at not only those boundaries that we're talking about and setting those clear expectations, but also how you can harness some of those job demands with those resources. So things like collegial support, flexibility in the workplace, whatever that looks like in your new workplace. But congratulations, that's awesome.
So our next question is, I've been doing my job for 3 years and I have felt burnt out for most of that time. I always feel extremely tired and completely detached and uninterested in my work. Is there such a thing as never coming back from burnout? And what are the symptoms of burnout versus being in a rut or simply needing a career change?
So there's a couple questions in that. So I'll start with the one around, can we come back from burnout? I absolutely think you can come back from burnout. It just depends on how burnt out you are. So if you are incredibly burnt out and it sounds as though there's a fair amount of cynicism, as we spoke about, kind of that disengagement and detachment from the job as a bit of a coping strategy when we are burnt out, I think that may mean maybe we need a bit of a break and a bit of a holiday, which isn't uncommon when we are burnt out, actually needing to take the time to reconsolidate and fill our cup again. Having a break, there's nothing wrong with having a break. We do find that highly conscientious or perfectionistic types of people, not always, but can burn out as well as highly empathetic individuals too. So I guess when we are looking at, can we come back from burnout? Of course we can come back from burnout. It might just mean managing it over time and taking a bit longer of a break to refill our cup.
And what about the difference between burnout and simply being in a rut or needing a career change?
I always encourage you to go back to your values here. So values in your career and why you're doing the job you do. I think when we do look at, do I want to change my career or am I not engaged currently? That's a really good question, because often the two can mask themselves quite similarly when we are feeling not engaged in our jobs. It's not uncommon for us to ask that question, do I want to change? So come back to our values, come back to what matters to you in the job and the reason why you started in the first place.
And I think a lot of people in the last 12 months have had that kind of reflection time and really thought about whether their career is where they want to take it or whether they're ready for a redirection. And it's really important to sit back and think, what do I value? What do I want in a job? And have them as your starting points.
Reflection is key. And as I said, this is really quite generalized information that I'm providing. So if you are really needing further guidance, I'd also consider talking to a career counsellor, because they can be really helpful in terms of understanding what your values are in various life domains. And I guess where you feel like you're currently living and the gap in between.
Absolutely. So the next question is from a manager, and she said that I manage a team of 5 people and I've noticed that they're starting to feel disengaged and like they're dragging their feet to get work done. We've had some tight deadlines recently with projects and there's been some long hours. How can I manage potential burnout in my staff when there's still work that needs to be done?
Firstly, I think the fact that you're asking those questions is fabulous, because it does show that as a leader, you do care about your employees' well-being, how they're going at work and their workload too, which is really protective. So I think checking in is always a great place to start there. Checking in with your employees, maybe one-on-one as a group, and seeing how they're managing all their demands, seeing how they're managing those tight deadlines. It sounds like it has been quite busy. As I said, I think it's fabulous that you are asking these questions, because it does show your employees that you actually care. And it sets the tone for that culture that you want to create in a team. So the feeling that people matter.
And I think it's really important to be fostering that kind of environment where your staff do feel comfortable to come up to you and talk about when they're feeling a bit burnt out or when their job demands or their work demands are a bit too high for them and they need a bit of assistance. And having that culture and that environment at work is so important. So it's great that you're asking the question and trying to move towards that state.
Absolutely. And as I said before, burnout is not just an individual issue. So if you are burnt out, it's not because of something you have done alone. It's also an organizational issue. So the employer and the employee both share responsibility in trying to remedy that. And that does start with culture, I believe.
Awesome. And this last question that we're going to look at today was asked by a lot of people. It's a very common one. So I currently work full-time whilst trying to finish my degree as well. The whole work-study balance is enough to consume a lot of my energy, but keeping on top of my own health, finances, and relationships has been a challenge as well. When I put all my energy into work, my study will slide. When I fall behind on my study, stress becomes a problem. When I'm stressed, my health takes a hit and I can't be there for my relationships or my best at work. The burnout I'm feeling is a domino effect for me. I'd love to hear your suggestions on how to balance it all and establish limits or boundaries on all the areas of my life.
There is a great photo on the internet somewhere, which I'm sure people will know of, and it says kind of like social life, study, relationship, career, good health, good night's sleep, pick 3. And I think it's really about kind of juggling all of those balls and prioritizing some of those balls. So when I think about that, I think of, and there's this great analogy we talk about with kind of glass balls, so the things that really matter to us, and plastic balls. So when we're juggling them all, if we drop a glass ball, it can smash. So those are the important ones that we want to keep juggling. So things that we should prioritize that matter most to us, family, health, etc., whatever that looks like for you. But those plastic balls, we can sometimes let slide a little bit and they bounce back up, right? So if you do have to say no to some commitments like catching up with a friend for dinner or coffee or whatever, there's no shame in that. And I think being really compassionate with yourself and kind with yourself around learning to master that juggle is really important too.
And I think everyone that is balancing so much stuff, be proud of how much you're doing. Like, you're a superwoman for being able to juggle full-time work and study and relationships and your health. And it's no easy task, and you have to remember that and be kind to yourself.
Absolutely.
So that's all we have time for today. But before we finish up, we have a very exciting surprise for you. We have created a free mini ebook with Elly to talk about all things managing burnout at work. And it's got amazing tips in there, similar to what we discussed in the video, and worksheets that you can work through. If you want to get your hands on one of these, head to our website, smartwomensociety.com, and download yours today. We also have our 100 days of self-care game plan if you want to create a unique self-care challenge for you as well. And we'll pop the links to both of these in the description below. Elly, thank you so much for joining us today. Your tips and insights have been absolutely incredible.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, you're welcome. And if you want to get in further touch with Elly or book a one-on-one consultation with her, she's located in Brisbane or also does telehealth. So reach out to her on Instagram or via her website and get in touch today. So we hope you enjoyed this video today. Comment down below if you have any other ideas for topics that you want us to cover. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the thumbs up button. Have a lovely week. Bye.
Bye.